on this beautiful autumn day, I'm happy to be together with Professor Paul Gavriliuk, a professor of theology at the St. Thomas University in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the US. A dear friend, not only of mine, but of many here in Iași. And welcome, Professor.
I'm very glad to be here.
We are glad to have you. And let me just ask, why, how come have you come to Iași? Is it your first time here?
This is actually my second visit to Iași. I visited Iași for the first time in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, and on the occasion of the translation of two of my books, one on early church history and the other on modern Russian Orthodox theology, that were translated by the Doxologia publishing house in Romanian.
Let me go on and say that your name, your activity has been linked lately to the founding of a new organization or association. So it's the International Orthodox Theological Association, which we can call, for the sake of brevity, IOTA or IOTA. That's something new, something grand, if I may anticipate a bit. And what is IOTA and what are its objectives?
Well, IOTA, of course, is the smallest letter of the Greek alphabet. And so from the very beginning, we wanted to put everything that we as scholars and as professionals do on behalf of the church in perspective. So we conceived IOTA shortly after the Council of Crete. And it was the experience of the Council, the experience of finding a path to Pan-Orthodox unity that proved to be in many ways so arduous and so difficult, that generated our thoughts that also something could be done at a grassroots level to support Pan-Orthodox unity. So it was the Council that spurred us to thinking about an association such as the International Orthodox Theological Association.
So who is willing and who is allowed to become a member? Is there a manner in which one becomes a member?
Yeah, we follow standard practices of any professional organization, and so there are different membership types. And so you could, for example, be a scholar involved in the studies of Orthodox Christian studies, and so that would be regular membership. And then we also have memberships for community members, and then we have memberships for people who are professionals and do not have terminal degrees or doctoral degrees, but let's say doctors, lawyers, etc., who are interested in all questions related to faith and culture. We also have associate memberships for the non-Orthodox scholars that are involved in the ecumenical dialogue. And in addition, for those who do not presently have permanent positions and for students, we also have student memberships and discounted or supported memberships. So we're trying to be as open as we possibly can.
That's great. It sounds great. And what else sounds great, I would say, is that you are organizing a first big conference in Iași on 9 to 12th of January 2019. And that will be a rather great event, I would say, and a big event. How was the idea of such an event, and maybe even the idea of such an organization, born?
Well, we were inspired when we were in Crete, and I had the privilege of serving as an independent consultant of the Ecumenical Patriarchate on external affairs and Crete. When we were in Crete, we were inspired by the words of Patriarch Daniel of the Romanian Orthodox Church, who spoke, or at least expressed a hope, that a council of this sort could happen every 7 or 10 years. And so we thought that as scholars, as lay leaders, as professionals and churchmen, we could contribute to the conciliar process. And so the idea for the organization was our IOTA, as it were, our contribution to the conciliar process. And then subsequently, I spoke to a number of very prominent scholars around the world, and intuitively, without me even having to convince them, they all felt that such a pan-Orthodox organization that would combine the efforts of all people of goodwill and scholars around the world would be desirable. So I actually didn't have to sell anybody on the idea. People intuitively understood that something like that would be good. And Romania felt like a natural choice because in many respects it's a country with a very rich and a very strong Orthodox tradition and history, and it's also a country that's very often neglected or unjustly, shall we say, forgotten in the discussions and in the narratives of Orthodox world history. So because I had friends in Iași and because I felt that I could have great support, specifically with the team at Doxologia, led by Catalin Jekyll, I felt very comfortable approaching him, and I was delighted to find such a great support in the Archdiocese.
Since we are speaking about the conference, I ask you to tell us a few words on the main topic of the conference, and maybe also on other, dominating themes that they'll be tackled there.
So the overarching topic of the conference is Pan-Orthodox unity and conciliarity. And within that topic, we wish to shed light on various questions of historical and contemporary importance. So for example, there will be a session dedicated to the Council of Iași of 1642. While the event is widely known in Romania, and especially here locally, I think it deserves greater exposure in the larger Orthodox world. We will have a session on the notion of synodality and primacy in the Orthodox Church, also a question that is of great import both for the Orthodox Church and also for the ecumenical dialogue. We will have sessions that engage critically with what is now the heritage of the Council of Crete. But in addition to that, there will also be a wide variety of topics on both classical theological issues, such as, for example, Philokalia and its reception through the centuries, which is also significant for this region, to contemporary issues, issues of bioethics, issues pertaining to orthodoxy and international relations, and a plethora of other questions, such as, for example, orthodoxy and peace in the Middle East.
Well, since you brought up these many and this much variety of discussions, maybe I'm not wrong to assume that there will be among the participants quite a lot of specialists that are not theologians per se, but they are maybe specialists like medical doctors or bioethicians.
Yeah, you're quite right. When we say International Orthodox Theological Association, what we mean is that these are people who have had some exposure to Orthodox theology and are theologically literate. But their final degrees and their training, their principal training, does not have to be in theology. So we're thinking of theology as something that grounds and unifies all knowledge. But we're really conceiving of this organization as tackling questions of faith and culture more broadly. So to use, if you will, a Renaissance Italian word, we're thinking of this organization as an Orthodox republic of letters. In other words, republic of scholars who come from different walks of life, and also of professionals and church leaders. So we're glad that so many clergy will be responding also to our call for papers. We have been very surprised by just the incredible response that we've had all over the world. And so to give you a sense of how large the conference is going to be, we're expecting more than 200 speakers from over 30 countries, and that is also including such countries as Hong Kong and Kenya and Brazil, and obviously also what will be very well represented are countries in Eastern and Central Europe.
Oh, it sounds impressive, if I may say so. And am I wrong to assume that it's been a long time since such a big conference this kind of conference of this amplitude has been organized?
In terms of the scholarly output, we believe it would be safe to say that we are poised to become the largest gathering of Orthodox scholars in modern history. Again, we thought that even having about 100 speakers would be significant, but as I said, the response to our call for papers has just been overwhelming, and we certainly couldn't accept all worthwhile proposals, but it would be a very, very rich fair, and we hope very much that as this work is received by the Church, that it would bear its fruit in due course.
Perhaps it's time to say a little bit about the group that has organized, has monitorized, and how the selection perhaps of the papers was conducted.
Yeah, so I followed, in creating IOTA, I followed the general structure of the American Academy of Religion, which is a professional association that has existed for nearly a century now. What we created with our board, that includes Professor Gail Woloschek, who is a major internationally known radiology scientist, and Carrie Frederick Frost, who is our secretary and also has a specialization in the founding of nonprofits. We conceived of IOTA as instantiated in 25 permanent groups. And so these groups, to give you some sense, range from classical theological subjects such as my own field, patristics, or dogmatic theology, or moral theology, to more contemporary topics or more contemporary fields such as religion and science, or Christianity in the Middle East, or Christianity and international relations and politics, or the role of women in the church. And so we believe that what we're creating essentially is truly representative of the sets of issues and problems that the church at large needs to grapple with. And so the idea is to give people a concrete experience of how we can begin to think with the church as scholars, as intellectuals, as professionals, so as to contribute to the shaping of one history. Because for a very long period of time, the Orthodox churches have led very isolated histories. In other words, the Russian church has its own, if you will, story to tell about its past, and the Greek church has its own story to tell, and the Romanian church has its own story. And this is an opportunity, if you will, at the grassroots to establish a Pan-Orthodox society that would foster that kind of exchange of ideas and hopefully contribute its own and make its own mark on the conciliar process.
What do you say about the dissemination of the fruits of this conference?
The primary purpose of the conference is to give people an experience of meeting together and brainstorming various ideas. Just the very fact that you will actually have thinkers from so many countries in one place creates a completely new environment and a completely new, it's a bit like jazz in many ways. It's sort of theological jazz. And therefore, I would not like to overdetermine what will come as a result of the conference. I know that we will not be publishing any official statements, and so to the extent to which we ourselves do not presume to speak on behalf of the church, we are simply a think tank in which the main questions and the main positions would be forged. If you think of the 20th century, then the main issue of the 20th century has been the doctrine of the church or ecclesiology. This has been the major headache of the ecumenical movement and indeed world orthodoxy at large. Now, one way in which it finds its expression, this particular question, is of course in our perpetual jurisdictional disputes. So what I tried to create with the people that are behind IOTA is a space in which we could get together and discuss things in a free and respectful manner, but a space also that would be as free of ecclesiastical power play and geopolitics as it's theoretically possible. Now, ideally, of course, any society here on earth needs to, in some ways, have as its goal the communion of the saints. Now, in this fallen world, obviously, this is only possible in a very, very imperfect manner. But our idea is that we could discuss the things that truly matter without being dominated and without the outcome of the conversation being determined by narrow ecclesiastical and political interests. That's the hope, that's the aspiration, and giving people that experience itself would be novel in Orthodoxy, I dare say. Now, in terms of the 21st century, as Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, who in fact has graciously agreed to be a keynote at the conference, so he will be giving the major lecture. As Metropolitan Kallistos Ware has observed, the main question of the 21st century is the doctrine of the human person. And so that issue, what to make of humanity and the image and likeness of God in us, and how to understand the phenomenon of man, is also going to be at the center of our deliberations. It's not a question that at this point is an overarching theme. Perhaps it's a question also for future conferences, but it certainly is a question or a topic that will emerge as a central topic, no doubt, from our deliberations.
I can imagine most of our viewers would be interested to know if there is an interest to have the general public also present to some degree, or to have a reception from the general public maybe. Could you tell us a bit if this conference is open to the public, in what degree?
So in many, for many professional societies, it's usually a very delicate balance between, on the one hand, members and the conversation that could be kept at a certain level, and also the importance of it being accessible. So in terms of general public, we're hoping to do two major things. First of all, we're publishing all abstracts of the papers online. And so what that means is that we wish, even before the conference, to be open about the things that we are planning to discuss. And secondly, I have just mentioned a public lecture of Metropolitan Kallistos, which will take place at the National Theatre of Iași. And that magnificent facility can hold several hundred people, and the members of the public would be very much welcome at that opening event. We also hope, of course, that the faculty of different universities and schools in the area would join us for various sessions during the sessions of the conference. And we're working with the Archdiocese on that.
To anticipate for a bit, can you tell us a bit about the program, maybe how a day would look like, a conference day would?
Yes, so the idea is to give people both an opportunity, obviously, to discuss their ideas at a formal session, at the formal sessions, and also to have enough time for informal fellowship. And so there needs to be a good balance between those two. So because of we're thinking of 50 to 60 full sessions, and so there will be 5 or 6 parallel courses on which those would run, and then that would mean also about 4 sessions a day. So 4 sessions a day seem to be a reasonable pace for 3 days, and within that, there will also be great time for fellowship.
That would require rivers of coffee, I guess.
And we hope, yes, we hope that caffeine will be flowing like river, because caffeine, after all, is the main engine of intellectual life. Without coffee, there is no intellectual life.
Right. So to come closer to the end of our meeting, I would very much like to know, what are your hopes, or maybe personal hopes and expectations from this conference? And maybe for the whole enterprise, for the IOTA enterprise, but especially for the conference.
I mean, I am interested, whenever I'm at the conferences, what I'm looking for example, is junior talent, sort of rising stars and people who could contribute to the welfare of the church long term. And also, for example, my friends in the United States, we're already planning on publishing new voices in Orthodox theology. which would be voices that come from non-Anglo-American sphere. So they will be published in English, but they will come from the countries other than the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And so that's one of the concrete outcomes of the conference. The second concrete outcome would be primarily in a very informal way, seeing what questions shake out as the main questions that trouble people at large. It's like taking a pulse of where the church is, or at least where the people who are thinking about the future of the church, what are the main questions that concern them. And I think I would very much hope that, I would not want to predetermine what these things are, because I would very much like for IOTA to be as unscripted as it possibly can be. And so this is, as my grandfather, who is a conductor in Hungary, would say, that the conductor doesn't make sound, he makes music. And so what I hope to do as somebody who is the founding president of IOTA is precisely to make music without making any sound.
Well, that sounds great, if the pun may be allowed. And what would be next for the IOTA then?
Well, we will take about 2 years to sift through this extraordinary wealth, this cornucopia of interesting ideas and insight and papers that will be read and discussed at the conference. No doubt new projects would emerge. Those would be probably cooperative projects. And the important part is those would be international projects. So the idea is to allow a significant number of lay leaders and church leaders, and we also hope to have scholar bishops and bishops in our midst, to give them a concrete experience of sort of Pan-Orthodox exchange and communication. I should say that in this regard, of course, there are other good attempts at such communication, but they're usually meant for only a short period of time, and they're meant for a very, very specific goal, such as a production of a common statement. And I think these are very important. What we're trying to build is a place where people from all Orthodox churches, all Orthodox jurisdictions can come together and recognize a sense of their common task, or a sense of their common destiny, a sense of their common calling within the Church Universal.
Framework, even, you can call it?
Yes, we would like to see, because no good effort is possible without robust institutions. At least this has been my experience living in the West, that robust institutions such as the universities, for example, or the structures that build up, for example, democracy, are crucial for any worthwhile endeavor to succeed. So what we're hoping to have mega conferences every 4 years, but then between those conferences, we're also hoping to have smaller projects and smaller symposia, such as a symposium in Jerusalem that we held a year ago. We're hoping to have them more regularly.
But 4 years, doesn't it conflict with the Olympics?
Hopefully we're not going to be competing with Olympics, but you could certainly think of IOTA as Orthodox Olympics where everybody wins. Where everybody wins. Well,
if I may allow to, let's say, to summarize a little bit for our viewers. We have here a large organization trying to provide a platform for dialogue, a framework, to build up a framework for Orthodox theologians and non-theologians but interested in theology, who are organizing a first conference, a large one, here in Iași in January 2019, where under the guidance of 50, if I'm not mistaken, 50 great scholars, each specialist in their fields, quite a few younger and older voices would be able to provide their insights on different topics, and free from in complete freedom, but then also under the supervision of great scholars. I think that's a great, I'm excited actually, and I congratulate you on that idea and on the effort that you put.
Thank you. Well, we're also very grateful to the Archdiocese of Iași, and particularly to Metropolitan Teofan, for very strong support of this endeavor from the very beginning. We were obviously very profoundly moved by the fact that both the Holy Synod of the Romanian Orthodox Church and Patriarch Daniel blessed the endeavor. We have the support of other church leaders, including the Ecumenical Patriarchate and other local churches. IOTA, of course, will remain a Pan-Orthodox endeavor that seeks to have productive and close relationships with the church leaders. That's our aspiration for the future.